AppleBlossom. Written and narrated by Eloisa Hernandez. Chapter 1. Found. Lucy frantically combed through the crowds of people hurrying back and forth along the sidewalk. Everything was foreign, the shops and the leaning buildings. Maud's stilly voice reverberated through her throbbing skull, warning her about wandering off and dying from numerous possible things in the city. Not a one cares about a little girl lost in the middle of a city. Folks care only about their families and themselves. A terrible dread and agonizing fear punched Lucy's knotted stomach, and lightheaded, she nearly gripped a lanky man's coal-colored coat as he brushed by. Why hadn't she heeded Maud? It had all happened so quickly. It was like a fast-paced dream that was flying by, a whirlwind that carried her up and far away. Lucy had thought it would be okay to sit on the old steps of their broken-down shop. Maud surely wouldn't be rankled about that. As she slumped upon the steps dramatically, basking in the sun like a cat she'd seen outside the store the day before do, a little girl had tapped her timidly on the shoulder, spooking Lucy so much she thought her soul might jump clear out of her. Dressed in a worn-out yellow dress that was too tight, she observed the girl's fetching dark blue eyes. Her whey-faced skin was sunburned, and her uncombed golden hair greasy. But Lucy didn't care. When the girl skittishly inquired if she'd like to play, there had been no part of her able to resist. They exchanged names and were hysterically tickled that their names rhymed when said together, Lucy and Lacey. They'd gradually meandered away from the shop on their escapade of having a jolly time. Lucy fizzled to a tiny ball on the sidewalk, against the wall of a rubbled store, holes in the concrete and pieces of fallen block cluttering the edges. They'd played all sorts of games, hopscotch, hide-and-seek, ring around the rosy, etc., but that didn't matter anymore. After half the day had whizzed by, and the sun hung high in the baby blue sky, Lucy informed her newfound friend it was time for her to head home. What she meant by home was an old abandoned shop caressing the city's intersection. It'd taken only a few minutes for Lucy to notice she'd strayed too far to discern her way back. She treaded impetuously in circles like a wayfaring stranger, but now sat back against an unfamiliar store, jittery and timorous at what Maud had relayed to her concerning the dangers of the city. Eyes darting up at every person sailing by. The women clicking in their low heels hardly cast a glance down at the forlorn child, and the men gazed ahead with grim faces on a mission to procure a job. Lucy didn't know what time or day it was, or that she was in Oshawa, Ontario at the beginning of March of 1930. All of this she would find out years later. Lucy attempted to fondle logical thoughts, but her entire being quaked with fright and made it seemingly impossible to think. She felt smaller than ever, afraid, a panic she had encountered before. Anxiety could only claw at her stomach and fill her head with unreasonable fears. The one hopeful thought nesting in her conscience, encouraging her to hold back the tears, was, surely Maud will come looking for me. The sun slowly began its descent from the crystal blue sky, bright orange rays lathering people's backs as Lucy strode angsty across the street to the park Lacey and she had played in. There were gathered homeless families spread throughout the lifeless park, preparing for a chilly night. They had been hit by the Great Depression, just as everyone had. The worst was yet to come in 1933. I tarried impassively among patches of trees till most of the sullen souls were blanketed in slumber. The only way in this world to get away from the troubles of the awake state. Planted against the trunk of a dry, leafless tree, Lucy surveyed as the last people huddled down keeping each other warm from the dropping temperatures. Sneakily, I trudged up to a family of 3, their eyes shut, the shadowy silkiness of dusk's arrival cocooning their limp selves. They had all brunette-colored hair, though the stocky father's was thinning and gray around his bitty ears. Filthy, torn-up blankets were tucked around them like waves, and the dried-up grass beneath them served as a padding. I gazed at them longingly, achingly. It didn't matter who they were, as long as their hearts were good. Food and welfare couldn't hold anything warm. Could I experience the joy and assurance of a father and mom? Would it ever unfold? My eyes were drawn magnetically down at the blessed child, a reedy little boy, cuddled against his portly mother. He was between the curious age of 6 or 7 years old, and how I envied him. As I peered, hovering over them inconspicuously, my mind dawdled away, as it did every so often, back to what I yearned to recall, yet what I ran from. I had several memories about my family, but they were chopped up and unclear. My mother scooping me into her lap and crushing me in her sweaty arms, crying. My father sliding his food from across a rickety table to me. It was more of a sense, more of a memory where I could never glimpse their full figures. They were just blurry blobs, nameless, faceless, like those you passed in the street and went about to forget. I just somehow felt it was my wrong that I didn't have a family, and it weighed my spirit with a heaviness I couldn't quite grasp. What if they had given all their food to me? Had I starved my parents to death? Or maybe they were alive, but had abandoned me because I was too much of a burden. I wished to know. I wanted desperately to know. Before I could contain the inner turmoil, hot tears were rolling down my cheeks, dripping onto the earth. Cautiously, the little boy's eyes fluttered open. Then he mumbled something unintelligible. But before he spoke anything louder, I put my finger to my lips as he eyed me curiously. Briskly in the watery darkness of the park, and its enveloping faint street lights, I darted away into the shadows under the spider-like trees. I then lay down in the nook of a musty tree root at the base of an oak's trunk, staring blankly, eyes in my head, I suppose, thinking, wondering, hoping. I slept not a wink that night. I heard a faraway scream, someone's shoes crunching the dry grass, the cool wind shaking the brittle branches, and all of it tingled through me, causing a skittishness. Dawn's veil, reeling in the morning, gave the sky a gray look, and the stars withheld their prior brightness. What was that? Someone running, tiny feet. Could it be Maud? I sprung up and sprinted towards the sound on the outer sidewalk of the park. The person was too fast. Plodding back to the park, wider awake than if I had drunk coffee, I stood in the openness of the area of grass as the sun steadily rose. Its mysterious light I always wondered about, pouring warmth into my frozen body. For a few minutes, I forgot all my troubles, just basking in the morning sun, and the feeling of love, or what I imagined love was like compared to the sun, warm and cozy. Lucy Montgomery! Breaking out of my dreamy daze, I whirled around towards the road directly behind me, and there was Maud, her walnut-colored eyes on fire with anger. But as for me, I failed restraining the flooding relief that I had been found, that it was over. My heart and feet carried me at full tilt towards Maud, her stance undeniably stiff. My arms threw themselves around her bony waist, and I hugged her tightly, but was briskly pushed away. Maud then shook me till I thought my head would fall right off, waking up children I could tell by their faint whimpers in the early crisp morning. Others were awake as well. had been awake even before Maud had shown up, flushed and lively with rage. "You were to stay inside. Just why can't you ever listen, you stupid girl?" At that, she grabbed my arm tightly and yanked me along until we reached the shop. People watched. Some merely glanced, but all were amused as Maud hauled me towards home, scolding me down the street. Men assembled at store doors in lines, wearing their best apparel, black suits and hats on their heads, turned to witness Maud's frenzy as we neared the shop. Ashamed, I refused to glance back at them, my face burning, and no doubt beet red from my ears to my neck. She threw open the front door, shut it with a bang, and dragged me across the cracked wooden floor to the thin, half-open, moss-colored door. Tossed me on the bed with all her might, and raised her voice even louder and higher than it had been outside, with her hands planted on her hips. "You daren't show your hide till I'm good and ready, and wipe off that smile." She commenced yelling, while with my head down and hair covering my eyes, I listened faint-heartedly and adoringly. But no matter what Maud said or did, she could not wipe that smile off of Lucy's face. I finally gained the gumption to look up at the furious, caring face of my friend, and realized how much Maud really cared for me. A warmness tickled my insides. I wasn't completely alone in a world where there seemed no love. Probing deep into those walnut-colored eyes, I sensed fear, saw pain, received blatant anger. I remembered how we had no names. I recalled many things, even what I wished I hadn't. Maud had a real name, but said it brought back bad memories. She couldn't tell me any more than that. She mostly kept things to herself. Only by the slip of a tongue had she voiced flashbacks of feelings to me. Before we'd acquired our names, I'd referred when speaking to Maud as Yes'm, and she would summon or converse with me as that girl or girl, and on rare occasions, dear. But that changed one day, when she entered the shop with a book, its pages weather-damaged with dried wet spots where rain had drenched it. Some pages were torn out, but for us it was a treat to have a book, any book. The author's name was Lucy Maud Montgomery. She named me Lucy and named herself Maud, and her last name was Montgomery. Snapping out of the comfort of my conscience, I beheld that she was towering over me, the fire in her eyes cool and faded out. "Maud, what's an orphanage like?" I cupped my chapped, yellowish but white little hands under my chin. I was filled with fascination on the subject, on lots of subjects, and finding out most weren't bleak as they seemed. "It's a place you never want to go," Maud responded, her pale white face stony, void of any expression. Before I was able to drop another question in the open, she had exited the room. On the dingy bed beside me was a can of peaches, the top already off. I promptly reached in with 2 fingers and pulled one syrupy peach and deposited the juicy fruit in my mouth. It practically melted. I closed my eyes tightly, cherishing such a treat. It wasn't every day that you got a peach. By the time Maud tactically re-emerged from where she had disappeared to, I had devoured the whole can of peaches. You know, those weren't just for you. A slight grin formed on her rosy pink lips. Her girly look had returned now that the rage had sunken away. Her thick, long chocolate-colored hair was draped over her thin shoulder. I peered into the can guiltily, but didn't say anything. "I sent for Isla. Should be here soon." I was on my feet faster than a cat could pounce, an instinctual defensiveness consuming me. "I can't stay with her!" "And why ever not?" Maud frowned, the clickiness light across her beautiful features almost grotesque in the shadows. "She's hateful and bossy. Why couldn't you ask Maisie?" Before I could grieve her with my persistent whining, Maud's inch-long temper blazed. "Shut up! Now!" With that, she smacked me in the back of the head before I could see it coming and get out of the way. "I daren't ask her. You're to learn your lesson and to stay with Isla whether you fancy it or not." When Maud spoke in that tone, it meant I was going to listen, whether I fancied it or not, and so I remained silent. Scarcely a moment later, a scream erupted from outside. Stone still, my eyes stayed on Maud, whose head had snapped in that direction, her feet following. "Stay here," she ordered it, in a whispery voice, and was gone. Those few minutes seemed like hours, as I sat fidgeting, listening intently at the door, and all I could hear was faded shouting. I slowly rose from the mattress on the dusty floorboards. I hadn't known what I was doing till I made it to the front door. Parked on the curb of the street was a white truck, and people were handing out bread. Two from the inside, a blonde, animated lady and a pudgy, bald man. Outside of the vehicle, and moving limberly about, was a young man with a churlish body build, nervously fishing things out from the back of the vehicle and distributing them. A good way away from the truck were two men fighting over bread, and a thin woman was trying to stop them or get her own meaty hands on the food, but wasn't doing a swell job of it, if so. She got in the way of a fist, and her screams could probably be heard miles away. She staggered to the pavement, but kept jumping up and intervening. Some children were crying. An older teen boy was cheering them on, and a girl about 12 looked on with disgust as she pranced past them, her pinkish nose turned up. Then from the steps of the shop I caught sight of a wee boy, about 7, with tears running down his dirty light brown skin. On the opposite side of the fight, I knew that I had to take him home with me. There was not an inkling of hesitation. Reddish-brown, shaggy hair, surprisingly short. As I neared him, I noted his upturned eyes were dark cocoa. He was disturbingly an orphan. I could always tell who had parents and who didn't. It was easy when you were one yourself. Rounding the center of the crowd of spectators, I approached him as if approaching a timid deer. Apart from the crowd and blatantly eyeing him, it took him only a few seconds to catch sight of me. He roughly wiped his eyes and glared up as if to say, "Leave me alone." But why should I heed the facade of hardness he portrayed, through his tears, when beneath was need? I brushed close to him as the fight grew louder, and other adults tried to stop them, only to end up joining the fight. "I'm hosting a party, with lots of food." I whispered it nearly in his ear cautiously, as when people heard the word food, their ears perked up. Searching their engrossed faces, I was content to know none had heard. The little boy tilted his head, gazing up at me with eager eyes. I was wondering if he'd like to come. His dark eyes darted around, similar to mine, with secrecy. "What's a party?" His voice had an adorable drawl that was foreign to me, but undoubtedly cute. Maud would surely think so. But the issue was, I didn't know a lot about parties. Oh, why couldn't Maud be here to explain? "Well, you play lots of games, you eat cake, food, and have lots of fun." I explained it with a slight shrug. The squabble of the adults became faint in my ears, and focus. "I don't know if we have cake, but we have food." "I want to go." He began jumping up and down on his toes, eyes lighting up with excitement and sparkling with wonder. "It's tomorrow. Spend the night with us." I put my finger to my chin as if thinking, side-eyeing an older lady passing very closely by as she deserted the cat fight. "Well, I'm supposed to bring Miss Pentley eggs from Mr. Shuve." He sighed, lowering his head, revealing a greasy scalp. "Well, you don't have to." It was said not at all knowing, but his head shot up, and he surveyed me as if it was an evil entity of some sort. then ejected. "You need a thrashing. You never disobey Miss Pentley." Guilt gripped me. I had never learned manners as every child should, because I had no mother or father to teach them to me. "I have to go now." The little boy started to walk hurriedly away. "Well, then come on the morrow at lunch." I shouted over the curses of the two men that the others had started to drag away from each other. The woman screamer was nowhere in sight. By now the bread was in pieces on the concrete and scattered on the street. The little boy twisted his torso and waved, responding that he would as he traipsed away from the shop, the almond-colored basket swinging in his brown hand. Casting one last glance at the dispersing crowd, someone grabbed the back collar of my dress, then Maud's voice, sending horrified chills down my spine. "I told you to stay inside. 'Tis the second time you haven't obeyed me." Maud yanked me up off my feet and revolved me so I could see her, then boxed my ears till my eyes watered. "Will you obey me?" She glared emotionless at my pain as I sputtered shamefully, "Yes, yes, yes." Then she released her taut hold, dropping me the half an inch to the pavement. My ankles and knees buckled. The following hours of the day were quiet and dull, with Maud silent and Lucy pouting. She appealed to things adventurous and joyful. The next day was to be the opposite. The end of Chapter 1. Written and narrated by Eloisa Hernandez.